Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Recaps and Reacts with me, Sarah. So last week I covered season 1 of Ugly Betty, which I did mention. Ugly Betty is one of my top 5 favorite shows of all time. I will be covering season 2 this time around this week. So if you want to watch season 2, now is the time to stop, as I'm about to get into some major plot lines. Or if you just want to watch a recap of season 1, please go back last week please go back and watch my video from last week where I am recapping season 1. So I'm kind of just going to be doing the same thing I did for season 1. I'm going to be talking about some notable characters or guest stars that were in season 2 and some fashion guest stars that were in season 2. Then I'm going to get into the major plot lines of season 2. So here we go. So we have guest stars. We have Rick Fox, which is played, is Dwayne, is the character that he plays. He is a security guard for Wilhelmina. Victor Garber, who is Betty's writing professor when she takes a creative writing class. James Vanderbeek, who is an advertiser for Mode Magazine. Marlo Thomas, she is an advertiser that appears in Mode Magazine. Monique, she is Lamanda. She is the Mode security guard on the weekend. Eliza Dushku plays Cameron, an actress who is supposed to be on the cover of Mode Magazine for one issue. Betty White, who plays herself. Annie Potts, who plays Linda, who is a sidekick. Bow Wow and Omarion, they play themselves. They do a performance on an episode. Gabrielle Union, who plays Renee, which is Wilhelmina's sister. Gene Simmons playing himself. Larry King, who makes a cameo. Daniel makes an appearance on the Larry King show, Larry King live show. And then we have Lindsay Lohan, who plays Kimmy, which is one of Betty's nemesis in high school. This particular character also is a recurring character throughout the series. And then we have Giovanni Rossi, also known as Gio for short, played by Freddie Rodriguez. So I'm going to introduce this character a little bit later because he is a part of a plot line for this season. Some fashion guest stars that we have Kenneth Cole, and they're all playing themselves in this, by the way. So fashion guest stars are Kenneth Cole, Victoria Beckham, Christian Siriano, Nina Garcia, Vera Wang, Josie, Robbie Myers, and Naomi Campbell. So remember, if I do miss any guest stars or anybody that I missed from this list, please comment in the comment section. And again, if you do like this video or like anything I'm talking about, please like and subscribe. But yeah, let's get started. So a main storyline I forgot to mention last season was Amanda finds out that she is the daughter of Faye Summers. And if you remember, Faye Summers is the former editor-in-chief of Mode Magazine who passed away in a car accident. So Amanda does find that out. And she doesn't know who her biological father is. So she is trying to find that out throughout the whole entire season. She does find out that she's adopted, but she does not know who her biological father is, but she is the daughter of Faye Summers. So some of the cliffhangers that we left off on season 1 was Henry, Charlie, and Betty. We don't know what's happening with that love triangle. Ignacio is still in Mexico trying to get his visa so he can come back to the States. Santos, we don't know if he is alive from the robbery that went bad where he got shot. We don't know if he is alive. Alexis and Daniel, we don't know if they are alive from the car accident that they got into. And then Wilhelmina and Bradford are engaged. So those were all the major cliffhangers that we left off on season 1. So I want to touch a little bit on the first episode of season 2. We see that Hilda is spending time with Santos in her room. So we think that Santos is alive. He has like a bandage around his abdomen, and they've been kind of just hiding out in the room. Hilda doesn't want to really go out into the world. She kind of wants to just spend some time with Santos. But at one point, Santos says, we gotta like basically face reality. We gotta get out of this room. And Hilda says, I don't want to this is not verbatim, but she mentions like she doesn't want to let go. And she gives them a hug and a kiss. And then we hear a knock on the door. Betty knocks on the door, and Hilda's by herself holding a pillow. And we find out at that point Santos actually did not make it. Hilda says to Betty that he's gone. And that was the first time that she had said that out loud, and just kind of breaks down. So unfortunately, Santos actually does not survive and he doesn't make it. So that was very sad. It's a very sad episode. Hilda did wonderful. Anna Ortiz, she did wonderful in that episode. You just felt the pain that she was going through. Good episode. And then Henry actually, how that episode ends is Henry steps off a bus. So we're assuming he's coming back from Tucson and he's back in New York trying to possibly reconcile with Betty. We don't know yet. But on to the next. I do want to point this out. This isn't a major storyline, but I did want to point this out. Betty was kind of holding down the fort. Obviously, Hilda's grieving. Ignacio's still back in Mexico. She's taking care of Justin, and Justin's in a summer camp because I guess it is summertime. He's in a camp that he hates. And Betty ends up getting him an internship for Mode Magazine. And so when he ends up working at Mode Magazine, he forms a friendship with Mark. So that is kind of important because that also plays out later on in the series. So I did just want to point out that little thing. But like I said, Henry ends up coming back from Tucson. He tells Betty, they run into each other at Mode actually. I don't think Betty knows that Henry had came back from Tucson, but he runs into Betty and says, I'm back just for a little while until Charlie has her baby. I came back because Mode or Me Publications has really good insurance and it covers all the expenses for the baby. So that's why he came back. He does not know that the baby that Charlie is having may not be his. Betty has not said that, has not told him that, and Henry does not know. So that's kind of how they first meet when Henry comes back from Tucson. So moving on to another point, Betty breaks into Wilhelmina's apartment, and how that comes about is because Betty is trying to get the book. So let me back it up a little bit. We do find out that Daniel and Alexis actually survived the car crash that they're in. So that is good. Betty visits Daniel in the hospital because I guess they're just being in the hospital for observations. Alexis was unconscious longer and she does lose her memory, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit further on in this video, but that's just something to point out. But Daniel and Betty have been talking. He wants, or Betty's trying to get the book for the next issue of Mode so Daniel can sign off on it. But Wilhelmina doesn't really give her the book. For what reason, I don't know why. It's just Wilhelmina being Wilhelmina, but she doesn't get the book. So she ends up breaking into Wilhelmina's apartment. She gets the keys off of Mark's desk to Wilhelmina's apartment, breaks in with Christina. And while she breaks in, she finds that Wilhelmina is in fact having an affair with Dwayne, her security guard. So she hides under the bed while Wilhelmina and Dwayne are having an entanglement. And she finds that out but ends up getting the book. Wilhelmina finds out that Betty was in her apartment, and how she finds out, she has these Buenos Dias earrings Betty wears, and they show those in last season in the trip when Betty goes to Mexico. She has these Buenos Dias earrings, and so one of the earrings falls off in Wilhelmina's apartment. She's putting on her shoes and she sees, I don't know if it was the Diaz or the Buenos, but one of the earrings were on the floor. So Wilhelmina picks it up and she's like, oh gosh, I smell a burrito, is what she says. So she calls Mark and she says, I need to find dirt on Betty, because she knows at this point Betty knows about the affair that she's having with Dwayne. So Mark is like, I'm on it, and he looks at Justin, because remember I said Justin has an internship at Mode Magazine. Excuse me. So basically it's implying that Mark is going to get some dirt on Betty through Justin. We don't actually see it, but that's what I'm pretty sure is going to happen. So Mark finds out some dirt on Betty, which I'm assuming is Ignacio's back in Mexico trying to get his visa, because Wilhelmina's father is a senator. And so Wilhelmina makes a proposal to Betty. She basically tells Betty that, I know you know about my affair with Dwayne, but I can help you out. I understand that your father doesn't have his visa. My father is a senator. I can get that for you if you just keep your mouth shut. Don't tell Daniel anything. So that puts Betty in a tough position. You know, her father's back in Mexico. She's not really sure exactly when he's going to come back home. And then she also doesn't want to betray Daniel by not telling Daniel that Wilhelmina is having an affair on Bradford. So Wilhelmina puts Betty in a tough position, but she doesn't make her decision yet. I guess she thinks about it. So Ignacio, back in Mexico, him and Hilda are speaking, having conversations, and you can tell Ignacio's kind of struggling because, you know, obviously Hilda's going through it right now. Santos has just passed away and she's grieving, and Ignacio knows how that feels because if you remember, Betty and Hilda's mother passed away. So he understands exactly where Hilda's coming from and he kind of wants to help her in the grieving process, but he's stuck in Mexico. So he's having a really hard time adjusting, or he just wants to get back home. So back to Alexis and Daniel. I mentioned that Alexis, her memory is gone. So she loses her memory, but Bradford kind of takes advantage of the situation. He kind of wants to rewrite history. Alexis has no idea that Bradford didn't want her to transition to a woman, because remember from the first season or my recap video, I do mention that Bradford had told Alexis, or Alex at the time, that if you transition, you might as well be dead to me. And so Alexis doesn't remember that at all. So Bradford tries to basically be more, tell her that he's accepting of it and that they never had that situation that happened. So he tries to rewrite history. Alexis ends up telling Daniel that, you know, she loves Bradford. He's been supportive. And Daniel's kind of like, I'm sorry, what? And Daniel's not having that. Daniel goes and confronts Bradford, and he was like, I'm going to tell her everything if you don't tell her the truth. But Bradford's kind of like, listen, I know I made some mistakes. So if I have the opportunity to correct it, I want to do it. And so Daniel just kind of leaves it alone. But Betty ends up making that deal with Wilhelmina, the proposal, where, you know, Wilhelmina basically proposes that she can get the visa for Ignacio if Betty agrees to keep her mouth shut. She ends up, I guess, making that deal with Wilhelmina. I don't think we ever actually see her actually saying that she agrees to do it, but we find out that Ignacio is coming home. And so how he's coming home is because he's able to get his visa. Bradford ends up telling Wilhelmina that he wants to postpone the wedding because he's getting closer to Alexis and he doesn't really want to put a lot on her. So he ends up postponing his and Wilhelmina's wedding, which of course annoys Wilhelmina because her motive is to take over Mode magazine. So there is no love really with Bradford. She just wants to take over Mode magazine. The faster she can do that, the faster they get married, that's the faster she can do that. So of course that puts a hitch in her plans. She doesn't like that. Back to Henry, Christina ends up telling Henry everything about Charlie, that Charlie potentially is having a child that may not be his, that she actually ended up cheating on Henry with Dr. Farkas, so the baby may not be his. And Henry goes to Betty and tells Betty that he now knows everything and that he wants to pursue a relationship with Betty because he was like, that was literally the only thing that was keeping us apart, was Charlie being pregnant with our baby. But the fact that she lied to me and that baby may not be mine, we can now be together. But Betty's kind of just like, no, I don't know. I don't think so. So that's the thing. Gio. So I mentioned earlier Gio, who is played by Freddie Rodriguez. He is an important character. Him and Betty, Gio is a sandwich guy. He has sandwiches or delivers sandwiches. He has like a little sandwich stand that he does in Mode. So when lunch comes around, you can get food from Gio or a sandwich. But there is a little bit of flirtation going on with Gio and Betty. And spoiler alert for anybody about me, I love Gio. Gio is one of my favorite recurring characters. And you'll see why. I think Gio really pushes Betty to do certain things. He's always kind of rooting for Betty, and there's something about Gio. I love Gio. So yes, Gio, he makes his appearance in season 2 as a sandwich guy, and him and Betty kind of have a back and forth a lot. It's cute. So they kind of flirt throughout the whole season. So that's Gio. As I mentioned before, Bradford wanted to postpone the wedding because of his relationship with Alexis. And like I said, that didn't make Wilhelmina happy. So, of course, Wilhelmina being Wilhelmina, who is plotting and scheming, she goes and visits Alexis and rewrites her own history as well. And tells Alexis that they are best friends, and she shows him this corny little photo album of like pictures that she and Alexis did, like little events that they went to that I think were photoshopped by Mark ultimately, but it's kind of funny. But Wilhelmina is just sharing like this photo book with Alexis and trying to convince Alexis to basically give her blessing for Bradford to marry a Wilhelmina so they can get this show on the road so Wilhelmina can take over. Which does end up working out. But she does tell Alexis that kind of if you deny us to get married, she mentions something about I don't think his heart can handle it. So that was a little hint to something. So just remember that. So mentioned before, Ignacio back in Mexico, he was able to get his visa to come back to the States. So Ignacio is on his way. He's packing his bag back in Mexico. But a gentleman comes, this younger guy comes in and asks him if he's Ignacio Suarez. And he says yes. And he's like, okay, great. He's like, can I help? Ignacio says, can I help you? And he said, you just did. And he comes in with a gun. And no one is in this house in Mexico. I guess it's just Ignacio. Like his family's not there at the moment. So this younger guy comes in with a gun. We don't know what's going to happen, but that happens. But we do find out the guy is the son of Ramiro Vasquez. Now, if you remember from season 1 and on my recap video, I mentioned that the reason why Ignacio did not come into the States legally is because he fled Mexico because Betty and Hilda's mother actually they fled together because Betty's and Hilda's mother was in an abusive relationship, and Ramiro Vasquez was the guy that she was in the relationship with. So Ramiro wants to get his revenge because he's like, you took my wife away from me. And so, or you took, yes, you took my wife away from me. So Ramiro wants his revenge. He wants to basically unalive Ignacio. And the younger guy is actually Ramiro Vasquez's son, which I guess was from a previous relationship before Betty and Hilda's mother, where he was with her. So, but the one thing Ramiro says before he wants to unalive Ignacio is he wants him to make him some flan. And yes, flan, like the dessert flan. So Ignacio is a really good cook. And Ignacio, I guess, was working as a cook in that household, which is where he worked or where he met Betty's mother. And so Ramiro wants him to make some flan. And he's like, if the flan is great, I won't unalive you. And so he makes the flan. Ramiro says, this is better than what I remember it to be. But then tells his son to unalive him anyway. So, the son basically is about to unalive him, but Ignacio kind of jogs his memory and it says, remember when you were growing up, like I used to make you all this food, and Betty's mother, I can't remember her name, but she would help you out, would be nice to you, all these things basically, so he would not unalive Ignacio. And Ramiro comes in and it's like, what's up? Like, why isn't this done yet? And there's kind of like an altercation happening between the son and Ramiro, and Ignacio's in there. And then it shows all of a sudden it just shoots out to the house that they're in, and we hear a gunshot. We don't know exactly what happens. We don't know who's been shot, what's happened. We don't know. So, the next thing we get to is there's a black and white ball that's happening. And it's also kind of like a little bit of a masquerade ball, and Claire makes an appearance here. So if you do remember last season, I said Claire gets out of jail, or somehow breaks out of jail when they're being transported somewhere with Yoga, the convict, who is Lorraine Toussaint. This whole entire time, they have been staying in a house in Montauk. So her and Yoga have been doing their thing over there, hiding out. And Claire finds out that, I believe that oh yes, Claire makes an appearance to have Bradford. She wants to run away with Bradford, basically leave the States and kind of hide. She's like, we have offshore accounts, we have all these things. And she does mention to Bradford, have you been taking your heart medicine? Again, that's kind of important. Remember that. So Wilhelmina actually sees Claire at the ball and from afar, and she senses what's happening. And so Wilhelmina goes on stage and announces the wedding publicly. So that was her way to stop Claire from trying to do whatever she was trying to do, run away with Bradford, and announces publicly that they're going to get married. And Bradford basically is like, Claire, our relationship was over the day you murdered Faye. So he kind of just leaves Claire standing there, kind of like in shock, and then him and Wilhelmina are on stage together. Amanda is still trying to find her father. Wilhelmina ends up telling Amanda a little bit about, possibly, she doesn't know who her father is, but gives her a clue about her father because Wilhelmina was the assistant to Faye Summers, so she knew Faye well. She did mention that she saw Faye with a guy before, and she remembers distinctly seeing a Tweety bird tattoo on his behind. So that is the only thing that Wilhelmina may know that could possibly be Amanda's father, but that's all that she can give Amanda. But that's better than what Amanda had, which was nothing. So there is that. So Amanda's trying to find a guy with a Tweety bird tattoo on his behind this whole entire time, and that may clue her into that being her father. So excuse me, speaking of fathers, Henry does find out he is the father. Shout out to the Maury fans. If you remember that, he is the father. So Henry finds out he's the father, but Betty says they can't be together because she's like, you're going to be leaving in a few months when Charlie has a baby. So there's basically no point for us to be together. Alexis' memory comes back, and she remembers that Brad actually was not supportive. Bradford was actually not supportive of her transition. And Alexis also tells Daniel that the car accident that those two were in was her fault because Daniel this whole entire time thought that the car accident was his fault. But in fact, it was her fault because if you remember from the first season, she had the brakes cut because she ordered a hit on Bradford, and she was driving Bradford's car, and the hitman actually cut the brakes for Bradford's car. So Daniel's upset. He's furious because he thought the whole entire time he had all this guilt that it was his fault, but it wasn't. And Alexis asks that she doesn't tell Bradford, their father, and Daniel's like, it's not like he'll believe me anyway. Because as I mentioned, Bradford always shortchanges Daniel, so, and Alexis is the golden child, so yeah. This isn't really a major plot line, but I did just want to point this out, the bond between Hilda and Justin. Justin is acting out. Obviously, his father has passed away. So Justin's going through it as Hilda is. Hilda's hanging out with a bunch of these 80-year-old women who have lost their husbands. She keeps hanging out with that group of people. Justin's kind of hanging out with a crowd that's up to no good, and he's getting in a lot of trouble, and Hilda finally confronts him about it, and they have a moment. Hilda's basically like, a boy is not supposed to lose his father. You shouldn't have lost your father. Like, I'm here. She's like, I feel like you and I are going this way. We're growing apart, but we need to kind of get it together and be there for one another. And they kind of have a moment. It was a really sweet moment where you can just, again, see the bond between Hilda and Justin. And it's a very sweet moment, but I just wanted to point that out. Betty also decides to pursue a relationship with Henry. Even though Henry's leaving for Tucson in 5 months, she doesn't care. She loves him, or she has strong feelings for him, so she wants to go ahead and see where this can take them. So she ends up pursuing that relationship with Henry, but is kind of sneaking around about it. Eventually, the family does find out. Ignacio finds out he's not really a big fan of it because, Henry's going to be leaving in 5 months. So he's like, why even endure this pain when you know what's going to happen? But whatever, they end up pursuing a relationship together. Christina, we find out Christina is married. Christina's husband comes, Stuart. He comes and finds her. Apparently, Christina, like back in Scotland, left Stuart high and dry, just left him one day, and he tracked her down somehow. And yeah, he was into drugs, I believe. He was heavily into that, and instead of confronting him about it, she just decided to flee. And so I guess he's been looking to her ever since. He said he's kind of got his act together, but we do find out that Stuart is sick, and he potentially may be dying. There's really no cure for anything, or I think there's like these experimental treatments, but it costs a lot of money, about $100,000 for him to try those treatments, but they don't have the money for it. So there's that. Because Stuart and Christina end up rekindling the romance that they had. So he does tell her that he's sick. And so, yeah, that happens. So just hold on to that little nugget because that's going to be important later on in this video. So just hold on to that. Okay. So Wilhelmina and Bradford end up having a wedding, and Betty's feeling a guilty conscience because remember, she knows about the affair that Wilhelmina was having with her security guard, Dwayne, but she still has not told Daniel because that was the agreement. If Ignacio comes back, if Wilhelmina is able to get the visa for Ignacio, then Betty can't say anything about the affair that she's having with Dwayne to Daniel. But Betty, being Betty, she feels guilty, and literally Bradford and Wilhelmina are at the altar, and Betty comes running in there and says, "I object!" And they're like, "We haven't gotten to that part yet." And so Betty pulls Daniel to the side and tells Daniel that she found out that Wilhelmina's having an affair on Bradford. And Daniel's like, "Well, how did you find out?" And Betty says that's really not important, and she ends up telling him that she's known for some time. And Daniel is like, "I'm sorry, what? I've been trying to find out anything on Wilhelmina, and you've been holding on to this." And he's upset, and he ends up firing Betty because he says that he cannot trust her because she withheld that secret from him. So he ends up firing Betty at that moment. But then Daniel goes into the chapel again and then pulls Bradford and tells Bradford that Wilhelmina's been having an affair. And Bradford doesn't really believe Daniel. And you can kind of see that Bradford's not looking so well. He's sweating a little bit. And Daniel points that out. And Bradford says, "I'm sweating because you're raising my blood pressure." And so he doesn't believe Daniel, and he goes back into the altar. And so while that's happening, when he goes back to the altar, unfortunately, Bradford ends up collapsing. So he collapses at the altar before they get to the I do part. So technically, they're not married. Bradford collapses. Daniel's doing CPR. And for that particular episode, we don't know if Bradford is alive or he didn't make it. So, but the important thing is that Wilhelmina and Bradford, they are not technically married at all. So, Claire is about to leave the country because, she's kind of defeated. She said that, Bradford said that they weren't going to get back together. He was marrying Wilhelmina, so there's no point for her to stick around. So her and Yoga were going to go, I forgot to some country, but her and Yoga are going to flee the country. But she does find out that Wilhelmina and Bradford actually aren't getting married. And of course, on fashion TV, it's noted that all over fashion TV, this wedding where Bradford collapses is all over the fashion TV world news. And we actually find out that Bradford had a heart attack. So we were getting little hints, little breadcrumbs throughout the season, when Wilhelmina was saying his heart might not be able to take it. Claire was asking if he's taking his heart medication. He was sweating at the altar. He was having a heart attack, unfortunately. So Wilhelmina, being Wilhelmina, she actually tries to still marry Bradford in the hospital while this man is sickly in his hospital bed. Wilhelmina has Mark get ordained. Mark gets ordained online and wants Mark to marry Wilhelmina and Bradford. Bradford confronts Wilhelmina about the affair that she had with Dwayne. And I don't know if Wilhelmina actually says something, but it's confirmed she did have the affair with Dwayne. And he asks, "Did you ever even love me at all?" Which he can tell she didn't. So he's just kind of like, just leave me alone. So that plan falls through. So, of course, Wilhelmina, she messes that up and she's trying to think of another plan to where she can take over Mode Magazine. So, Claire actually ends up seeing Bradford. So after she sees her children, she wants to go see Bradford. Because Bradford actually mentions to Betty, because Betty at some point comes into the hospital room that Bradford's in, and Bradford says, "The only woman who's ever loved me was my wife, and that is Claire." And Claire actually is at the hospital because Betty offers to call Claire, and she's like, "Do you wanna talk to her?" And she ends up calling Claire, and Claire's like, "I'm actually in the hospital." So Claire ends up going to go see Bradford, and they kind of have a moment together as husband and wife, and it's a sweet moment. He said he never had loved anyone more than her, so that was a sweet moment. So that's actually in fact, how how Claire ends up getting caught and back to prison. So when she wants to go see Bradford, she says that she doesn't want, because she's kind of in this disguise because, like I said, she's going to go flee the country. But she's like, "I don't want him to see me like this." And so she kind of goes back to her old self, looks like her old self. And there's a lot of paparazzi and everything in the hospital at the time. So everybody's clicking, taking pictures. So Claire gets found out that she escaped prison. And in the storyline, Yoga's still back at home at the Suarez house. And if you remember, I had mentioned that Claire said, "If I don't make it, if I'm not back in time, leave without me." And on the Fashion News TV, it mentions that Claire had been caught, and Claire had mentioned that Yoga had told the reporters or told the police that she actually died in a car accident when they were transported. So she gives Yoga an out, essentially. And Yoga runs away. You never know what happens with Yoga. Hopefully she made it. She was able to flee the country and live her best life. But Betty and Daniel actually end up making up. He says that he doesn't know why she withheld the secret of the affair from him, but she wants him to come back to Mode. And Betty actually decides she has to think about it. She doesn't really want to because she's having a little bit of a crisis. She feels that she's slightly changing. Like she said, she would never break into Wilhelmina's house or apartment to get the book and all this stuff. She's just doing things that she normally wouldn't do. So she feels like Mode may be actually bad for her. So she actually decides not to come back to Mode. But her and Daniel do make up. Unfortunately, Bradford ends up passing away. He is unalive. He passes away, unfortunately. And before he passes away, he asks Betty to take care of Daniel. And he kind of tells Betty that, "I remember when I first saw you, there was just something about you, and you are the only one that has been able to keep Daniel on track. And he would be lost without you, so take care of Daniel." And then he asks for some water. Betty gets the water, and then you just hear the beep. He passes away. So yeah. But Wilhelmina, being Wilhelmina, on this particular episode where Bradford passes away, at the very end of the episode, you see Wilhelmina in the morgue. And she's talking to this intern. She's like, "You look young. I bet you have like a lot of loans and all these things. But how about I like make a deal for you?" But you don't know what the deal is yet. But anywhere with Wilhelmina, it's not a good thing. So Wilhelmina, during Bradford's funeral, Claire comes with her orange jumpsuit on because she went back to prison, and Claire, Alexis, and Daniel, they actually end up firing Wilhelmina at Bradford's funeral. So now that Wilhelmina is not working at Mode Magazine anymore, of course, she has to try to find something else to do. So she tries to start her own magazine called Slater Magazine, which her father has money. And she asks her father for the seed money, but her father actually decides not to give her the money because he doesn't like the person that she's become. She's kind of become a really cold person, and he was just basically like, I'm not supporting an industry that turned you into this. So the magazine was going to be called Slater Magazine, you know, her last name, but that fell through. So, of course, Wilhelmina has to find another way or somehow try to get back into Mode Magazine. And also, just a little side note, Betty actually ends up coming back to Mode Magazine to after Bradford's funeral because Daniel kind of talks to her and tells her, you know, you're just growing up. You can still come back and work for Mode Magazine and still be the person you want to be. You're always going to have to make tough decisions basically wherever you're at. So please come back. Betty ends up coming back. Bradford did a video will, which kind of indicated to Alexis and Daniel that he knew he was sick, but somehow the video will doesn't go all the way through. Somehow in the video will they're watching it and Betty ends up crashing it or something annoyingly, and he doesn't actually finish his will, so they don't know who's actually going to take over Mode Magazine. So Alexis and Daniel decide to have a paintball fight in the building to see who will take over Mode Magazine. Alexis ends up winning, so Alexis ends up being over Mode Magazine. Geo, if you do remember Geo, the sandwich guy, he ends up going out on a date with Hilda. But throughout the date and at the end of the date, Gio's like, you know, I really had a good time. We should do it again. And Hilda's like, I don't think so. And Gio's like, kind of like, wait, why? And she's like, I feel like you have a thing for the other Suarez sister. So she basically is calling Gio out and saying, you have a thing for Betty and it's not for me. So, hey. So Gio actually is having a crush on Betty. So we're thinking. We find out, Wilhelmina actually, when she was in the morgue, so what she was proposing to that intern is that she stole Bradford's seed from him while they were in the morgue. So I guess the little intern got some of Bradford's seeds, and now she has like a vial of his seeds, and you see where we're going with this. She wants to basically find someone to carry her and Bradford's baby. So she proposes that Christina do it because somehow Mark found out. I believe Mark overhears that Stuart is sick and that, you know, he needs this treatment, and so he tells Wilhelmina that information. So that is how Wilhelmina tries to get Christina to carry her child. She's going to get Wilhelmina's egg and then Bradford's seed. Christina doesn't know that Bradford, that's going to be Bradford's baby. Christina has no idea. She just knows that Wilhelmina just presents it in a way where she's like, I just want to have another child, because Wilhelmina does have a child, but we'll get into that into another season. But she mentions that she just wants to have another baby, and so she offers $100,000 to Christina to carry the child because that's how much money is needed for Stuart's experimental treatment for his illness. So I believe Christina at the moment, she says no, but she ends up carrying Wilhelmina's baby. So Claire is actually in trial. She's about to go to trial because remember she did end up going back to prison when she saw Bradford in the hospital. So Betty brings some things from her apartment, I believe, or house, and there's some perfume that Betty brings, and the perfume is pretty important. Claire asks Betty to take care of it. She knew she had a date with Henry or something, so she's like, you can have it or you can wear it. And Betty does end up wearing the perfume. Betty starts to act a little different while she has this perfume. And she ends up going to the doctor because she has like an episode. She goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Is there something that's going on?" And Betty's like, "What are you talking about?" And this is actually kind of funny because Ignacio for a moment thought she was pregnant. He's like, "Oh my gosh, here we go again," referring to Hilda. So that was kind of funny. But it actually, the doctor ends up saying that she has, it looks like she, her symptoms, and there's a lot of toxins in her. So are you into drugs? And Betty's like, "No, like I've never done drugs." And so all these tests are ran on her, and he's like, "Is there anything different?" And we find out that perfume is actually poisoned, and it's actually confirmed because Amanda has Faye Summers' diary. So, little history with this perfume. Faye Summers actually had the perfume poisoned for Claire, because remember, Faye and Bradford had an affair, and so Faye was a little jealous of Claire because, you know, Claire is Bradford's wife, and so she actually poisoned the perfume, which in fact Claire was wearing, that it drove Claire insane, and unfortunately that's how she unalived Faye Summers. And so Claire actually ended up getting off in her trial because she committed the murder under reason of insanity. So she ends up not going to jail. So Betty saves the day with that. Betty was the one who figured out about the perfume, and she was able to get the pages from Faye Summers' diary from Amanda, and was able to submit that in court. And so Claire got off. So again, Betty saves the day. So we also find out that that Gio really has a thing for Betty. They do have a moment where they have a moment, and Gio gives Betty a hug, but he kind of is looking at her in a way, and you just kind of know from that point on that Gio does have a thing for Betty. And so, but she's still in La La Land with Henry over here. So yeah. But Betty turns 24. It is her birthday. She turns 24, and she's supposed to spend all this time with Henry. But guess who comes back to town? Charlie. So Charlie actually ends up coming to New York City and is spending the time with Henry. And I do believe it's because I think she said she had a conference or something. But honestly, it's probably really just to torture Betty because, you know, Charlie can't stand Betty. And so Betty's is supposed to spend her birthday with Henry, but Charlie is doing all these things with Henry, basically kind of maybe just making up stories that something's wrong with the baby, so causing Henry to be concerned and not being able to leave Charlie's side so he can spend time with Betty. So Gio sees what's going on, and Gio kind of saves the day and for Betty's birthday, and kind of takes her out and does all these things. He actually shows up with like a little carriage, the horse and carriage, like, you know, in New York where you always have like the little horse with the carriage. Gio actually shows up and takes her out on a horse ride in a carriage for her birthday. So sweet. Because Henry actually inadvertently leaves Betty stood up at a restaurant because she didn't know that something had happened with Charlie, and I don't think Henry was able to tell Betty. So she's kind of just there at this restaurant on her birthday by herself, and Gio shows up in the carriage, and he's like, "Come on," and it was really sweet. So Gio, cool points. Wilhelmina, in the meantime, actually comes back to Mode and basically tells Claire, Daniel, and Alexis that she is having Bradford's baby. So that is how Wilhelmina gets back into Mode magazine, because she says that I own a third of this company now because I'm having Bradford's child. So they have no choice but to kind of just let it happen, let it play out. Charlie ends up having her baby at Betty's house because Betty does throw a baby shower for Charlie because she figures she's going to try to kill Charlie with kindness since she's torturing Betty and Henry's relationship. So she actually decides to throw Charlie a baby shower at her house, and Charlie ends up having the baby at her house. She goes into labor and has the baby. it's kind of sinking in for Betty of what's going to happen. Like, you know, the fairy tale is over. They're having Charlie and Henry are having a child. They don't like Henry's going to have to go back to Tucson and take care of this child. So there's really no room for Betty anymore. So it's kind of sinking in. She's kind of like, she's upset. She's crying because she knows what's fixing to happen. So Henry ends up going back to Tucson after he has a child with Charlie, because as you know, him and Betty discussed before, he was going to go back to Tucson and help Charlie raise the baby. So they broke up, and Betty wants to get back on the saddle. So she ends up asking Gio out on a date. And how that happens is Gio was kind of teasing her, kind of being like, you know, you're stalking me. You tell me everything. You want me to be a rebound guy, right? And Betty's like, me? What, rebound guy? Like, no. And then Gio kind of just kisses her out of the blue. And she slaps him. But you can tell she kind of likes it. Because she runs off after she slaps him. She runs off and then she kind of goes against the wall and is kind of breathing really heavy. And you can tell she kind of liked the kiss. And Gio had mentioned in another episode, or was it the same episode? It was like either the episode before this, but he mentioned something kind of like, I don't want to be the rebound guy. I want to be the guy. And that was like the sexiest line, y'all. And it probably sounds corny when I say it, but when he said it, I was like, girl, you better forget about Henry and date this man, because yes, please. But her and Gio end up kind of semi-dating. They don't actually make it official because she kept saying they're in the exploratory phase. So I guess it's kind of like semi-dating. I don't know. But Gio tells Betty that, hey, I'm about to go to Rome for like a month. So you need to make a decision if we're going to date or not. And Betty's like, wait, what? And he's like, I'm going to Rome because he's a sandwich guy. He's like, he wants to find his flavor and he feels like he can go to Italy or Rome, like one of his heroes did, and find his flavor. And he proposes that Betty comes on the trip with him. So Betty thinks about it. She doesn't make a decision right away. So just remember that. In the meantime, Wilhelmina is starting to infiltrate Mode and slowly take over. So Alexis is, you know, takes over Mode magazine because she won that paintball fight her and Daniel had. So she ends up taking over Mode, or she's in charge of Mode magazine. So Wilhelmina, who has been in this industry for a very long time, she has a lot of relationships within the fashion industry. She does a lot of advertisers. She does a lot of designers. She knows everything. So it does kind of make Alexis' life a little bit easier. Whereas Daniel, who is still the editor-in-chief, but Daniel doesn't have, you know, a history in fashion like Wilhelmina does. So Wilhelmina is starting to slowly take over Mode magazine. Alexis not really knowing, but that's exactly what's kind of happening because Wilhelmina is a very manipulative person. So that's what's happening. There's a little boy who comes into Mode magazine to Daniel's office. He's speaking French. Daniel doesn't know what he's saying, but he ends up finding someone in the office who speaks French to translate for the little boy. And the little boy essentially is saying that Daniel is his father. And Daniel's like, I'm sorry, what? No, until there's a paternity test, I am not his father. But the little boy ends up having a letter that, in fact, does implicate that Daniel is the father because Daniel had a tryst with his mother way back when in France. And so he's like, that's my child. So, yeah. So Daniel has the father. He is the father. Shout out to Maury again. But, yes. So in the meantime, Henry comes back from Tucson and proposes to Betty. So he proposes to Betty and wants Betty to come back to Tucson with him and says, you know, I spoke to a friend. He can get a job for you. It pays really well. You can still send money back to your family and help them out. You can come visit them anytime you want to. And I am not a fan of that. Why should Betty have to sit here and uproot her life to fit into yours? I didn't like that. So I know the intentions were probably good, but I didn't too much care for that. So Henry proposes to Betty, and then Betty has now, she's in a conundrum. She has Gio asking her to come to Rome with her for a month, and now we have Henry who has come back from Tucson and has proposed to her. So she has two major life choices she needs to make, and yeah, she's given neither one of them an answer yet. But we cut back to the Mode versus Elle softball game. So apparently there is a Mode magazine versus Elle magazine softball game. I want to say it's annually, but they basically are playing softball together. Gio and Henry also were playing for Mode because Mode needed more men to play, so that's how they end up playing. But Wilhelmina goes and pitches, which I guess the editor-in-chief, I guess, is supposed to pitch, but somehow Wilhelmina ends up pitching, and Daniel's like, or no, excuse me. Before that, Wilhelmina and Daniel are having a conversation, and Daniel was like, you keep trying to take over my magazine, but this is my magazine. And Wilhelmina's like, oh, honey, don't you know you've already been pushed out? And because essentially Alexis had already asked Daniel to take a step back from the magazine, and that seed was planted by Wilhelmina, because Wilhelmina kind of mentioned to Alexis that life is a little bit easier at Mode magazine when Daniel's not involved, because again, as I mentioned earlier, Wilhelmina has all these connections in the fashion industry. So life is a little bit easier with Wilhelmina there. And Alexis is a business person. She is business minded. So that's kind of the way she goes into things. But it's still her brother at the end of the day. And she ends up pushing Daniel out of Mode, essentially. And Claire is just like, you think you are the person making these decisions. But really, in fact, Wilhelmina are making these decisions. And Mama knows best. So that is true what she's saying. But Daniel and Daniel Jr. ends up going off together, and Daniel Jr., I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but Daniel Jr. is Daniel's son. That's what he ends up calling him, so his name is Daniel Jr. So back to another love triangle, Gio, Henry, and Betty. Gio kind of confronts Betty and says, I feel like you're avoiding me. You haven't really given me an answer. Like, you're going to come to Rome with me. And then she's like, no, I'm not avoiding you. And then Henry is there, and she's like avoiding Henry. So she goes up to the outfield. It's in the outfield. It's Gio, her, and Henry. Naomi Campbell steps up to the plate because she's playing for Elle magazine. She hits the ball. I guess it's going to be a home run. All you see is Betty's like trying to catch the ball, kind of like this. Henry and Gio are like running towards Betty. They kind of all clash, and the next thing you know, it kind of goes black, and then you're cut to the scene with Henry is and Betty are in bed together. It looks like they just woke up, and it looks like they're in Tucson. So we're thinking like, oh, I guess she chose Henry. And she's in there talking about, and we got married, She does something like that, like she does a ring, and then she like goes somewhere and opens the door, and then she's cutting into a room with Gio, and it looks like they're in a room together. So this is some sort of dream. But then we find out that Betty was just knocked unconscious. So it looks like when Betty, Henry, and Gio, when she was trying to catch the ball, I guess they all kind of knocked into one another, and Betty got knocked unconscious. So you see that Betty ends up going home. She's leaving with a suitcase, but we don't know what she chose. We don't know if she ended up choosing Gio, which I would hope she chooses Gio, which I already know the answer because I've seen this show 5,000 times. But for the sake of you all, I'm hoping she chooses Gio, or if she chooses Henry, we don't know. But we know she's going somewhere. We just don't know who she's going with. But it shows her leaving with a suitcase, and she's saying goodbye to her family. And then it just kind of shows her standing outside on her stoop, and it kind of pans out. And that's exactly how season 2 ends. So not so many cliffhangers this time. We're ending with, the big thing is we don't know exactly where Betty is going to end up with. And, you have the saga with Wilhelmina and the Meade family. So that's pretty much the issue so far. So yeah, but that's season 2 for you. I do want to point out in season 2 that I have on some of my notes over here, I want to point out the relationship between Daniel and Betty in this particular season, because you can see they're actually having a much stronger bond compared to the first season. Obviously, they're working together a lot, but you can kind of see their relationship is kind of transforming a little bit into a beautiful thing. They really do care about one another. They have each other's back. It's very sweet. So I did want to point that out. Also, Mark and Amanda's banter. Now, I do mention in the first video that I did recapping season 1 how Mark and Amanda are great together. It really comes through in this second season. These two, I don't know, hats off to casting directors and casting and who get these people to play these roles, because Mark and Amanda, they are amazing together. They are just so funny. They vibe off of each other really well. The dialogue that they're given this season is just really good, and their characters really come through this season a lot. You kind of see it. Obviously the third season too, but this season I feel like this is where you really kind of start to see Mark and Amanda shine a lot, and it's great to see together. And also, yeah, just the chemistry throughout the whole cast is really good this season, so you really start to see it come through. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment in the comment section, like and subscribe to me, please, if you like this video. If this is your first time coming here, welcome. Hope to see you again. Yeah, next season, or I keep saying the next season. Next week, we're going to get into season 3 of Ugly Betty. Spoiler alert for anybody, season 3 is like one of my favorite seasons. It's a lot, but we're going to talk about season 3 next week. So if you're watching with me, watch season 3. Oh, I do want to mention, I believe season 2 had about 18 episodes, I believe, 18 or 19 episodes, 45 minutes each. So not as long as the first season, but yeah, it's about 18 or 19 episodes, 45 minutes each. So yeah, but anyway, so yeah, next week I will be talking about season 3. If you want to watch season 3, now's the time to watch it. Next week I will be talking about it. So please stop by next week to watch season 3. I hope my videos inspire you to watch Ugly Betty, because this really is a classic. Really, it's a great show. So I hope you do actually watch it. And then come back and watch these videos for the recap. So again, I will see y'all next week. Thank y'all for stopping by and watching this video. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. So again, see you next week. Bye.